Hi, this is Paul. I'm continuing to post the videos from the Northwest Estuary event. This was Chris Green's presentation, and Chris is very much a scholar, and he walks us through the beginnings of a piece that he's writing. His piece is about the wounding gaze, and he reads a series of 7 texts, and then he entertains some questions and sort of fills it in. And the heart of it is the kind of gaze whose judgment heals. And that's a very countercultural idea. Judgmentalism is about the biggest sin anyone can offer, but for some people. But he sets it out with these readings, and I'm going to add a couple of little clips. The first one was from Christian Baxter's first conversation with Stephen Osborne, and I just listened to most of that this morning. Really wonderful story. He's been telling his story a few places. Super interesting guy about taste, smell, and then how that then connects with how his world gets put together, and he became Orthodox. And the part that I'm going to play is when he first goes to an Orthodox church because he wants to learn about incense. He in his journey during COVID, everything sort of shut down in terms of his winemaking, his distillery, and he wanted to learn more about incense because a long time ago, tastes were often infused by incense into foods. It was an important spice, and so first it was myrrh, and then it was frankincense. And he found that only the Orthodox were really paying attention to this, and so that then, and through Grim Grizz, which was super interesting, Grim Grizz's chakras, and then into Orthodoxy. So it's a super fascinating story. I'm just going to play a little clip, but the whole video, I'll put the link below. It's on Christian Baxter's conversation with him. Wonderful conversation, so fascinating. And then the second clip, which I thought of when I was re-listening to Chris Green's talk here, talking about agape, and I think often the texts of perdition that Jesus has, Jesus always says, "I never knew you." And one way of thinking that is, "I've never seen you." It's interesting, I played this little clip from, maybe I'll just include it at the end, this clip from Karen's conversation with Clara about being seen. And so, I feel kind of bad because that second day at the conference was a huge day. It started out with Nate's talk, and then Chris had a fairly intellectual talk, and then what's coming is Rafe Kelly's talk, which would be another one that was just so powerful, and then Michael Martin after him, another powerful talk. So it's easy to sort of overlook Chris's presentation in this. For Chris, I mentioned before that in some ways there were a group of evangelicals who used to do a thing called the unconference, and that was sort of in the emergent movement. And the whole point of an unconference was to disrupt the usual patterns of conferences. And so in the unconference there wouldn't be speakers. But they also didn't have sort of the structure of Estuary and be able to do that Estuary thing in them. So And I thought about poor Chris Green a lot because of all of the speakers, he was fairly unknown. And so if you go to a conference with Vervaeke and Peugeot, it's part of the reason you need a green room. Of course, Alan's making jokes about this. Because sometimes the speakers just get mobbed. And so the green room is sort of there to protect the speakers a little bit so they can get a little breath and be able to perform on stage as they're supposed to. But not too many people knew Chris Green because he hadn't been much on the channel. So whereas, everybody wants to see Luke Thompson and Grim Grizz speak, Chris Green, one of the speakers, he didn't have too many old friends there like many people were making. So it was just a super interesting conference. So again, I'm gonna first play this little bit from Stephen Osborne from Christian Baxter, and then I'm going to play this classic John Vervaeke clip that I've used often, and then I'm going to play the talk, and then I'm going to include the Clara Karen Wong talk, a little clip from that about being seen. So that'll maybe make a nice little envelope for Chris's talk.
His job. So when I went over there, I walked in, and when I walked in, all the icons, the Orthodox Church is just coated with icons. And I knew that because I had been to that Jonathan Pajot thing at the seminary. But I wasn't really prepared for it. I thought, well, here's Mom, right? There's all these paintings. And I could tell, I knew enough about perspective, right, to know that something was going on in these icons that was not normal, right? The perspective was coming out, not in. They were looking at us, not us looking at them in the way they did. But anyway, so.
And what Jesus seemed to be incarnating as a kairos to change the history of the world and to offer you to change your own personal history is a different kind of love. This is agape. We have to distinguish between three kinds of love: eros, philia, and agape. See, eros is the love that seeks to be one with something. And that can be spiritual, like being one with nature, or it can be being one with a cookie by eating it. Of course, we come to think of eros erotically, right? Being one with somebody by having sex with them. Right? But remember, Socrates knew ta erotica, which wasn't just sex. Socrates knew what to care about. This is philia. So this is the love that is satisfied through consummation. Philia, this is the love that seeks cooperation. This is the love in which we experience reciprocity. We love the cookie because we can consume it. We love our friends because we are in reciprocity with them. What kind of love is this? And this is what Jesus claimed was how God loved individuals. This is the love that a parent has for a child. This is not the love of consummation. You're not trying to consume the child. That's evil. And it's not friendship. You're not, like, when you bring a child home from the hospital, and I've done this twice, right? That's not your friend. It's not even a person. You can't, it's basically a slug. But here's the astonishing thing. You love it. Not because of any way you can consume it or be one with it. Ew. Ew. You don't love it because, hey, what, great friendship. You love it, right? You love it because by loving it, you turn a non-person into a person. It's the closest thing to a miracle, and that sounds hackney, I know, but stop back and think about this. You depend on agape. It's because people loved you before you were a person that you have become the person you are. Love turns non-person animals into moral agent persons. It's like it's like somehow if I could just care about, right, my sofa enough, it would turn into a Ferrari or something. It's that powerful. And here's what Jesus was offering. That love can be made, it can be exacted and made available for all. Here's what is on offer. Here's why Christianity will take the Roman Empire culturally. With agape, Christianity can say to all of the non-persons of the Roman Empire, all the women, all the children, all the non-male citizens, all the sick, all the poor, all the widowed, can take all of those non-persons and say, we will turn you into persons. Persons that belong to the kingdom of God. We'll take another look at this in more detail next time. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Welcome back, everyone. I am very pleased to introduce to you our next speaker, my friend, Dr. Chris Green.
Thank you, Nate. I appreciate the invitation. It's lovely to be here. I'm going to jump right to it for time's sake. And the first part of my paper, the first of the two parts of the paper, will take about 2/3 or more likely 5/4 of my time. And in the first part, which is probably all we'll have time for, I'm going to lay out seven texts, and ask you to consider them with me and see what we together can make of them. My theme is the wounding gaze. I mentioned this in the call. And to kind of consider that phenomenon from these angles, I'm going to give you a passage of Scripture in true preacherly fashion. I'm going to start with a text from Scripture, then two philosophical passages, two testimonies, a poem, and a scene from a novel. Right? So 7 texts, in total, all refracting in various ways the wounding gaze. So first, the Scripture. And when they had kindled a fire in the midst of the hall and were set down together, Peter sat down among them. But a certain maid beheld him as he sat by the fire, and earnestly looked upon him, and said, "This man was also with him." And he denied him, saying, "Woman, I know him not." And after a little while, another saw him and said, "Thou art also of them." And Peter said, "Man, I am not. Woman, I am not. Woman, I know him not. Man, I am not." And about the space of 1 hour after, another confidently affirmed, saying, "Of a truth, this fellow also was with him. He is a Galilean." And Peter said, "Man, I know not what thou sayest." And immediately, while he yet spake, the cock crew. And the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. And the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. And Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said unto him before the cock crow, "Thou shalt deny me thrice." And Peter went out and wept bitterly. The wounding gaze. One more time, the key line from this passage, the Lord turned and looked upon Peter. That's Luke 22:54-62. In Star of Redemption, Franz Rosenzweig, a Jew who nearly converted to Christianity and then was disallowed, by God, risks a fascinating distinction between the gaze of the Father and the gaze of the Son. So here's the first of the two philosophical passages. The way of Christianity into the land of God thus branches off into two ways, a duality that is simply incomprehensible to the Jew, but upon which the Christian life, however, moves. The branching off of Father and Son means much more than a separation into divine sternness and divine love. So Father does not stand for sternness Son does not stand for mercy or love. Only by means of the Son does the Christian dare to approach the Father. Only through the Son does he believe he can come to the Father. If the Son were not man, he would be quite useless to the Christian. He cannot imagine that God himself, the holy God, could descend to him in such a way as he wishes, unless he had himself become man. The innermost indestructible piece of paganism in every Christian breaks through here. The pagan wants to be surrounded by human gods. It is not enough for him that he is himself human. God too must be human. The vitality that the true God, of course, also has in common with the gods of the pagans becomes credible for the Christian only when it becomes flesh in a particular divine human person. But by means of this, God becomes man. He then walks with trust through life as we do as Jews, and differently from us, also full of conquering power. For flesh and blood only let themselves be subjected by their like, by flesh and blood, and precisely that paganism of the Christian qualifies him for the conversion of the pagans. The revelation of the Trinity, Rosenzweig goes on to argue, separates God from God, and so necessarily creates in the Christian a similar doubling and duality. Hence, he says, the priest goes one way, the saint goes another. As a result of this splitting or doubling, the Christian must learn to feel the difference, and now we're back to the Rosenzweig's own words, feel the difference between the Father's gaze and the Son's gaze. The Christian must learn to feel the difference between the Father's gaze and the Son's gaze, because it is unchristian to mix together these two ways to God. It is a matter of tact to keep them apart and to know when it is right to take one and when the other. Third text. In a late paper published just a few years before he died, Ivan Illich, another disquietingly original thinker, who once described himself as a wandering Jew and Christian pilgrim, distinguishes the shameless gaze from the obedient one. And so now I'm reading Illich's words. The name by which the image goes, the power it holds, the respect it commands, changes in every iconic regime. The more I study the history of the image, however, the clearer I see how its function and place have changed, and the more forcefully I have been led to three intuitions. First, the polemical status of the image is a distinguishing characteristic of Western history. Second, dissension about the nature of images has until very recently been experienced as an ethical issue. Third, in today's age of interface, the image that has been a subject of dispute gives way before something new I call a show or the show. My motive for studying the gaze of the past is a wish to rediscover the skills of an ocular ascesis. My concern is to make clear the distinction between an earlier and a contemporary gaze. The European gaze wedded for several centuries to the image, and the gaze of today absorbed in interface with show. Not only the acuity, but also the moral quality of the gaze was trained in antiquity. One was admonished not to stare. At puberty, Jesuits taught us to guard our eyes. It was part of good behavior to know how a boy may look at a lady and when he is supposed to look away. More than that, as Catholics, we were trained to experience some looks as defiling and to mention them in the confessional. The shameless gaze is in, but I'm not speaking of leering at porn or sadomasochism. The contemporary paradigm is instrumental. The eye is trained to compete with search commands. The eye is entrapped in an interface with window icons, Microsoft window icons. And modern eye training cuts the gaze down to a form of scanning. And then he has this fascinating passage where he talks about how we used to have all of these words that shaded the meaning of seeing, but these words are vanishing. Like we don't have as much nuance in our language for types of gazes. The words that qualify the gaze are now taken as metaphors. Your glances can still be called leery, dirty, or kind, but they would never show up in textbooks of physiology. Formerly, a penetrating, dark, luminous, menacing, kind gaze had distinct powers. Some people in Mexico are still fearful of the evil eye. But my colleagues mostly laugh at Sheldrake, who studies how people turn around when you stare at their back. Now, next text, Julian of Norwich, and I'm hurrying. Julian of Norwich tells us she had desired to receive 3 wounds in her life: the wound of contrition, the wound of compassion, the wound of longing. When she was 30 and a half years old, she fell ill, and as she lay dying, she received the answer to her prayers. She's looking at a crucifix for comfort as she's dying. Nevertheless, I assented to set my eye in the face of the crucifix if I might, and so I did, for I thought I might longer dure to look even forth than right up. After this, my sight began to fail, and it was all dark about me in the chamber as if it had been night, save in the image of the cross, wherein held a common light, and I wist not how. All that was beside the cross was ugly and fearful to me, as if it had been occupied with fiends. After this, the over part of my body began to die, so far forth that underneath I had any feeling. My most pain was shortness of wind and failing of life. Then weened I soothly to have passed. And in this suddenly all my pain was taken from me, and I was whole, and namely in the over part of my body, as ever I was before. I marveled at this sudden change, for methought that this was a privy working of God, and not of kind. And yet by the feeling of this ease I trusted never the more to have lived, nor the feeling of this ease. For methought I had ever been delivered of this world, for my heart was willfully set on heaven. Then came suddenly to my mind that I should desire the second wound of our Lord's gift and of his grace, that my body might be fulfilled with mind and feeling of his blessed passion, as I had before prayed. For I would that his pains were my pains, with compassion and afterward longing to God. A little more than 500 years later, and almost 1,000 miles away, a young Sergei Bulgakov, not quite 30 years old, found himself in Dresden for spring vacation, experiencing what he called a wave of ecstasy in his first encounter with the West. And he writes this: "En route, we hurry one foggy autumn morning to do what tourists do and visit the Zwinger with its famous gallery. My knowledge of art was perfectly insignificant. I hardly even knew what awaited me. And there into my soul peered the eyes of the Queen of Heaven, approaching on clouds with the pre-eternal child. They had the measureless power of purity and insightful sacrificial readiness, knowledge of suffering and readiness for voluntary suffering, and the same prophetic sacrificial readiness was visible in the unchildishly wise eyes of the child. They know what awaits them, what they are destined for, and they come freely to surrender themselves, to accomplish the will of the one who sent them. She is to receive a sword in her heart. He goes to Golgotha. I was beside myself. My head was spinning. Tears at once joyful and bitter flowed from my eyes. The ice in my heart melted, and a kind of knot in my life came undone." 300 years before that, 300 years before Julian, artists created a mosaic in the dome of a Byzantine monastery on the outskirts of Athens. And this particular Pantocrator stands out not only from other mosaics in that place, but even of that time, and even of that time. And Rowan Williams has a poem that I'll read to you now about this Pantocrator. Are you showing these, Jess, behind me? Pillars of dusty air beneath the dome of golden leaden sky strain to bear up his sweaty heaviness, his bulging eyes, drawn inwards to their private pain, his hands arthritic with inner knots, his blessing set aside. He has forgotten us this once, and sees a black, unvisitable place, where from all ages he will die and cry, creating in his blood congealing galaxies of heat and weight. Why should he bless or need an open book? We know the words as well as he, the names Alpha, Omega, fire from fire. We know your cry out of the dusty golden whirlwind, how you forget us so we can be. And then finally, Shishaku Indo's Silence tells the story of Portuguese Jesuit Sebastião Rodrigues, who late 1600s sent to Japan to investigate rumors that his mentor, Father Ferreira, has apostatized. He's forced, as you know, I'm sure you've read the book and seen the movie, forced to witness the agonies of the native converts and told that he can save them from their pain if only he will tread on the image of Christ. And this throws him into crisis. And we're left wondering, will he or will he not commit the act of desecration? And then we get this scene, how his foot aches. And then the Christ in bronze speaks to the priest, trample, trample. I more than anyone know the pain in your foot. Trample. It was to be trampled on by men that I was born into this world. It was to share men's pain that I carried my cross. The priest placed his foot on the fumier. Dawn broke, and far in the distance the cock crew. That's the first part of the paper. My thoughts on it will hold. I think we're at 15 minutes. We have a few minutes for questions, and how do we want to do that? What's that? Well, no. I don't want to break the flow here. I really would like, if we have a moment for questions and responses, I really would like to hear what you're hearing first. I mean, I'm happy to share this later. I'll probably publish it at some point. But what do you see in those 7 texts about the gaze, the wounding gaze? I know it's a flood right now, but I'm happy with that.
Maybe it's active and not just passive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Illich very much wants us to see the gaze as, in another essay, he makes the distinction between lux and lumen, and between passively receiving light and actually having light in your eyes. You know, remember, there's the saying of Jesus, like, if the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? It's a reference to how you see, that you should bring, your gaze should be enlightening. You can learn to see in ways that bring light to the world, not just pick up or scan. You notice that image he has, that we've learned to see like a search command, right? We're scanning for things, but we're meant to see creatively. Our vision is meant to bring light to the world. So yeah, that's absolutely part of it. Yeah.
Feeling that hiddenness that's being revealed within. It's like hidden words within that are kind of that are realized. Mm-hmm. And there's like a sharing that is happening with these moments.
That's right, and that's why I started with the Jesus and Peter exchange. That Jesus looks at Peter in a way that brings Peter to himself. So one of my thoughts, that I probably should share this one, C.S. Lewis, in Meditations on a Tool Ship, which is a little essay everybody should know, you should all memorize it, that today, right after this session, that he makes a distinction between looking at and looking along, right? I think that we need to add a third category, which is looking upon. So looking at and looking along and looking upon are different things. And to look upon is to, in an active way, grace people with your gaze so that they are brought to themselves. Right? To look at people in such a way that they can see into themselves. Yeah, Raj.
There's this idea of the faithless one looks into water and tries to turn water and make milk. But the man of faith understands that you can see the butter inside of the milk. That's why you churn. Or you can see the fire inside of the wood, and that's why you burn it.
I love that. Yeah, like kind of recognizing the truth of the thing. Right. Yeah, good. Yeah, yes, sir.
Can you say more about how the gaze of the Son makes it easier possible for Peter to approach the Father?
Yeah, so I actually and this is in the second part of the paper, I don't think Christians want to say what Rosenzweig thinks we have to say, right? I don't think the gaze of the Father and the gaze of the Son are different. But, that would take us too long. But I do think that what Jesus looking at Peter does is it enables Peter to find himself, to remember, to come back together, right? And this is what the look of, the passage that Nate read, one of my favorite passages from Bulgakov, that to love someone in such a way that they become whole. Like that's what Jesus is doing, right? It's not Peter weeps bitterly, but he's not ashamed, right? So it enables contrition. Remember, Julian asks for 3 wounds, and one of them is contrition that awakens longing for God. And that's what Jesus does. Like he looks at Peter in a way that doesn't shame, brings about contrition, and awakens longing. And therefore, Peter's life can change. So I think but I wouldn't want to separate that from the Father's gaze.
You'd be so bad as to recently goes through that sequence that you just went through. The awakening of the
Yeah, so that what happens when Jesus looks at Peter, the text suggests, I think, is that Peter is struck to the heart, right? You remember that image that Bulgakov gives us of seeing this in Mary's face. Another thing I wanted to explore is the ways in which the face of Christ can be in any face. Right? The face of Jesus is not one face among many. It's every face in its truth. It's every face in its glory. And so Bulgakov sees this in the face of Mary, at the Sistine Madonna. But what happens is Jesus looks at Peter. Peter is struck to the heart. What comes is contrition, not shame. Out of that contrition comes longing. Out of that longing comes the coming together of his life, the making right of things, wholeness.
It strikes me, like, just as it struck me, the gazes are all deeply judgmental.
Yes.
But in a way that leads directly
to deliverance.
Of like the worst suffering.
Yes.
Into ecstasy.
Yes. It is a gaze that hurts you. So in English we have this saying that, the truth hurts. But I think we need to add on to that phrase. The truth hurts to show you where you have been harmed. The truth hurts to show you where you have been harmed so that healing can come. That's what judgment does. The judging gaze of Christ, which can appear in any face, will be incredibly more judgmental than we can imagine in a way that heals and frees. It does not shame. Yes.
How do you view, so just like Jesus looked at Peter, but how do you view the idea that when Jesus went to Lazarus, Jesus didn't cry for Lazarus, he cried because of the gaze of the people looking at him?
I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure. On my reading, we don't quite know why Jesus cries. I think the weeping, there's layers and layers to it, right? And I think that's a mystery best honored as mystery, right? That we don't want to psychologize Jesus. We don't want to try to get into what his motives were. But I do think, because, and the gospel is pretty careful to not tell us what Jesus is thinking at any point, right? There are a few times where we almost get a glimpse into what he's thinking, but not fully, not clearly. I think that's important. But it does mean a lot to me that the people that I have a good friend. His PhD work was on Christ and Mary in Christian tradition, and he made this observation to me once, that there's no record in the text and no record in the history of kind of Christian reflection of women or children finding Jesus intimidating. That seems hugely significant to me, right? That Jesus, the way he carried himself and the way that he's represented in Christian iconographic tradition is weighty, it's judgmental, but it's not threatening in that way. The people who are threatened by Jesus are those who have power and are hiding something. There's a kind of there's a menace to Jesus, but it's not for those who are truly weak and vulnerable. The sick, the old, the young, the marginal, like these people are not afraid of Jesus. Just the opposite, right? Think about the story of the sinful woman in the Gospel of Luke, right? To burst into a meal and to weep over Jesus and anoint his feet, let her hair down without him saying a word, right? Without him saying a word is, I think, tells us the kind of gravity his presence had. And that is on the countenance. Like the way, all of this that I'm describing here about his presence is only recognizable in countenance, which means his countenance had to have been the kind of countenance that only unnerves people who have something to answer to God for. Yes, ma'am.
So I really, what you were saying that was about that kind of scanning or searching. So I have a daughter who's 19, and when she was young, my sister, who helped bring her up, would watch these kind of reality shows that were like, maybe it was cooking, maybe it was whatever it was, but there was this critique. And it was all about the gaze to judge against something else, against some standard. And I always felt like, you know what, if we're going to have that, it should be a moral gaze, not a superficial one.
Yes.
Like, why can't we have, you know, like 10 people who have like serious moral feelings come together and really, you know, become better? And so I just think that I have a strong negative reaction to the gaze for the sake of critique, rather than for understanding, for coming to grace or coming to passion. That I'm like allergic to that.
And you should be. I think it's dehumanizing. And I think this is, the shaming gaze is directly opposed to the wounding one, right? In the way that I think these texts point to us. And I'll say this and then be done. Where I wanted to end the paper is that what we see in Christ is that the wounding gaze and the healing gaze are one. It is one face. And the beauty is that, and last image, Jess, if you'll show that, is that Christ came to have a face by looking upon his mother's. Right? And it's that's reflected in Peter's story. Thank you guys for this.
So you walk into this space, never having met any of these people before. What was your first reaction?
Well, I'd been to the barbecue the night before.
That's right. Yeah.
So like that was just like that sort of first reaction there, sort of kind of pulling up. I think we were together, like sort of rolling up to the barbecue, kind of, oh, okay, here we are. We're in the right space, right? And then I put my things, you know, kind of in a corner, and I was kind of amazed for a minute just to sort of see, you know, sort of like a first glance, like, oh, wow, you know, look at these people just happily sitting at tables, and I know you. And you know, of course, I'd never met any of these people, but I had been watching them for a few months. And then when people started kind of coming up to me and saying hello and knowing who I was, you know, that's kind of cool. There's something special there where people really want to connect, you know? And so, yeah. I mean, Nate's an amazing chef, right? So you were at the barbecue, Karen. What were you thinking?
Well, for me, it's always, like you say, it's kind of startling when you see people. I knew a lot of those people from conversations that I'd had with them on my channel, but a lot of them I only knew through watching them on somebody else's conversation. And there's something very, I don't know, there's something very mysterious that happens when you walk into a space and there's real live people there. The first time it happened to me was when I was at the Chino conference about 1.5 years ago. And I met somebody that I had only seen online and had never actually talked to online. I met them in person, and it felt almost like there was gold dust falling from the ceiling in between the two of us, because that real person was so much more real. Well, I don't know if that's exactly right. There's also something, Jonathan Peugeot talked about this one time, about how when we're on these screens, there's a light behind us. So there's a light that comes through us from the screen. And so people are naturally kind of illuminated from within on the screen, which kind of adds to their persona, if you will. Even if you're trying your best to be a real person, a real, authentic, just normal human being, The fact that you're on a screen already gives you some kind of star power, if you would. Like when you walked into the barbecue and everybody's walking up, oh, Clara, Clara, I've seen you online before. It's almost like a meeting of movie stars. Oh yeah, I saw your movie. I saw your movie.
Right. Yeah, but nobody's trying to like play it off or anything. It's just kind of, yeah.
Yeah. So you met all these people, and what was your impression of them?
Just what a gift, right? Because, sometimes you're a little bit anxious kind of going into these spaces, right? And you're like, oh, maybe this person doesn't like me, or, oh, this person and I might disagree about, this particular thing, right? But then, like you say, this kind of humanity of it, people met and there was no disagreement. There was no rehashing of whatever happened online. So that was, I don't want to say it was surprising to me because obviously I would be very optimistic, right? About things just going absolutely well. But I felt, Karen, that things went just so beautifully well, just really exceeding maybe anybody's expectation, just how warm and hospitable and is that what you were thinking?
Well, I'm just drinking it in. I'm enjoying what you're saying here. So the next day after the barbecue, you went into the larger room with all these people, and a lot of those people you'd probably never even seen online before. And so tell me a little bit about that experience. I'm also kind of, the reason I'm asking you these questions is there might be people watching thinking, oh, would I dare to go one of these conferences? What would it be like, And since you have kind of fresh eyes because you had never been to one before, and you haven't been involved with the little corner for all that long, and so you come to it with fresh eyes. Plus, you're coming to it with the eyes of a sociologist, so you have a kind of a unique perspective because you're also looking at it you have various reasons that you're kind of looking at this thing, so you can give us a viewpoint that not very many people can. So
sure. Okay, so to tell you the truth, I was coming from my Airbnb and I was just sure I knew the way, right? It was just past the Mormon church, right? And up this log cabin road. So before I got there, of course, I got very lost, right? Because I was coming on foot from this Airbnb. And so I got there before things started, but I was feeling like I was late. And just kind of, is this it? Is this the right place, And then this guy comes and greets me, and he doesn't have an official role. He doesn't have to greet me, but he says, "Hey, are you looking for the event?" And he kind of knew who I was, and just kind of showed me where to go. And I just thought that was just incredible. Incredibly kind, right? Because I am there. I'm a sociologist. I'm here to take notes or whatever, and here to meet people and here to talk to people and be part of the thing, but also I'll say it, what I've heard tons of other people say, I'm a little bit fringe, right? And then, yeah, just I was just welcomed right in and shown right to the coffee, which is sort of, really what I'm also kind of secretly looking for, but afraid to say. And so they knew me, they knew what I was looking for, and they took care of it. They anticipated my needs and showed me exactly where to go. And so I found my estuary group, and I knew someone in there. And so it was just a really warm kind of experience, which I wasn't expecting, honestly, because I'm not a churchgoer, and there I was in this church, So I don't know.
Well, and we have to say, Nate set the bar kind of high for every estuary from now on, because on the first morning, he had French pastries from a special bakery, and they were amazing. I don't know that that anybody's going to be able to beat that in the future. Whether maybe they can do that in Chicago. Get ready, guys.
Yeah. There's some good bakers out there.
So for the people who are listening who don't know anything about conferences like this, it's set up so that the main show really are these estuary groups, which are kind of small conversational groupings for people to, as one person put it, it's a place where you can come and talk about whatever is on your mind that you can't talk about anywhere else, because either nobody would be interested or it would be too fringe. and you might be on the outside for wanting to talk about it. But at Estuary, you can talk about those things, and there will be people who will engage with you about these things. So it started with an Estuary meeting even before there were any speakers on tap, and that gave us a chance to get to know like the 7 or 8 people that were in our group. So were you the only woman in your group?
No, there were actually 2 other women. There were 3 other women in my group. So it was
they stacked your group.
They did. And it was pretty balanced in that way. What about your group, Karen? Who was in your group?
There were 8 of us, and there was myself and 1 married couple. So there was another woman, but all the others were guys. And I think there were some groups where there was just 1 woman, and because we are a little bit male heavy.
That's true. It would be a little weird to be in a 1-woman group, I think.
Yeah, although I think all the guys were, very gracious, but they can get talking about their topics that they've been talking about on Discord for 3 or 4 years, and it can kind of get up in there.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're not familiar with it, you can feel a little bit lost, but yeah. I too was struck by just how warm all the greetings were from people. And for me personally, it was kind of funny because I tend to think of my channel as being a place where people come to learn about science and philosophy and things like that. But I discovered pretty early on in the conference that what people really wanted to hear from me were stories about my childhood, because they think of me as a grandma and they want to hear about what it was like in the old days. So it was a good place to learn a little humility. And then I had to learn even more humility, because every time any of the gentlemen saw me walking up the steps to the stage, they came rushing up to help me as though they thought I couldn't make it up the stairs by myself. But it was cute. I mean, it was very cute, and I was very appreciative. But finally, by the last day, I was running up the steps so nobody would come and help me.
Good for you, Karen. Good for you.
So yeah, it was a lot of fun that way. It's fun to be surrounded by a lot of men who really want to be gentlemen and really want to learn how to be heroes and warriors and all of that. It's very fun.
Did you meet any guys who specifically, surprised you or stuck out to you?
No, I don't think they surprised me or stuck out to me. I mean, the guys that were attending to my elderly.
This is funny because you don't look elderly at all, right? Like
the guys who were attending to me were guys that I have talked to on the channel before in the past. And so, and they're just real gentlemen, like Corey and Jeremy. And I mean, I know there were others. I just can't think of it right off the cuff right now. But it always amazes me. This is not the right word, because it's it's used as a pejorative nowadays, but they were very solicitous. They were concerned. They were concerned about my needs, and they wanted to make sure that my needs were taken care of. And, in normal life, you don't run into very many people like that. You just you have to do your thing, and you have to take care of yourself, and there's nobody around to kind of watch every step that you make and make sure that everything is okay. Maybe you got that when you were a baby and your mama was taking care of you, but when you get to be an adult, it's very, very rare to have so many people concerned about your every movement. And so that was fun. It was very interesting. But then you come back to real life, and you still have to clean the toilets at home and cook the meals and take care of things. So, so your experience the first day started with the Estuary group, and then there were the speakers. And was that, when the speakers started, was that a different kind of a feeling than you get when you're in an academic setting?
That's an interesting question. Because I've been to a lot of academic talks, and this was really geared toward I think the speakers, especially you, Karen, were way more attentive to, this is how I want to engage with this group rather than, and I think I heard you say something along these lines as well, just rather than like, here's what I have to say to you, and better stick in, this is the right answer or whatever. And I really saw, especially from you and then from others as well, maybe because I was attuned because we had maybe talked about it, that you were looking for, is this right? You were looking for, what does this audience want to me? How do they want to engage with me? And I definitely saw you do that. And I definitely saw, I think Michael Martin do that. And I think I saw Dr. Green do that. So I just sort of all these examples of what I would say is amazing pedagogy, right? Like sort of anticipating, again, this sort of anticipation and attunement to, what do these people want or need, or how can they sort of bounce back and engage? I saw that rhythm kind of develop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was one of the things I was really amazed by was how Nate put that group of speakers together, because there were 6 speakers from widely divergent fields and widely divergent ideas.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it sort of made this thread that all tied together. I mean, I don't know how it happened, but the same thing kind of happens in an estuary group. When you're at the beginning, everybody gets to name a topic that they would like to talk about. And then we kind of negotiate or navigate which of those topics we're going to discuss. And generally, what happens is you find a through line that goes through all the topics and weaves into a larger topic that allows everybody to get to explore a little bit about what they were thinking. But at the same time, it allows the group to gather around a main kind of meta topic, I guess you would say. And that's the way it felt at the conference, that there's 6 different people talking about 6 completely different things. And yet you could see that the meta topic at the top that joined all of them together. And I think that must have been what was in Nate's head when he chose the speakers, which is pretty amazing.
It was so cool. And I loved just sort of this way that he approached it, from like, okay, we're going to have a couple of people who are clergy persons. We're going to have somebody who's very movement oriented, who's going to sort of show us maybe some grounding sort of techniques. I think that might be what Rafe was doing. And we're going to have these poets, and we're going to have music and poetry just interwoven into this way of this dialogue between the speakers and each other, and the speakers and the estuary groups. I really did see that rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think one of the other things that makes it work is that the people who've been developing this idea of estuary have been training leaders for estuary groups for quite some time. So I believe that all the leaders that were kind of facilitators in the various estuary groups had gone through this training program. So they understood what it takes to allow people to open up about difficult topics and to be willing to accept disagreements and find a way to accept fringe ideas without, you don't have to sacrifice your own principles, and still you can find a way to communicate with each other and find meaningful relationship. So that was very beautiful. That was one of the things I really appreciated about the estuary groups.
Absolutely. I was amazed, Karen, about how just kind of, people engage that level of vulnerability that you don't see that in everyday life. And it takes, you kind of have to pull the thread a little bit to get that out of someone, or to navigate in that direction. But there wasn't any pulling here. People were ready to go. I don't see that in my sometimes in a community that kind of knows each other, but not in many other spaces.
Well, yeah, I mean, so at the very start of the conference, you sign in, you go into a meeting room with 8 people you've never met before,
yeah,
and you're in the deep end of the pool in 15 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Was that scary?
Oh, was it scary? Yeah, because here's the thing. It's sort of the topics are going around, and like somebody shared something personal, and I'm over here like, am I gonna have to share something personal? I don't know if other people are thinking that, but you kind of choose your own adventure. So it's a little bit more chill in that way. I mean, I felt like nobody was really pressured to share anything. But there is a little bit of, oh no, kind of sneaky sort of, this is coming around to me and I've got this story. Do I share it? Do I not? Do I share it? Do I not? Maybe I'm the only one. Maybe I'm like sort of the cynic of the group. Um, but I guess there's a space for the cynic as well, I think, in the estuary.
Well, so what was the topic that you wanted to discuss? And then did you get to discuss it, or did they discuss some other topic?
I think we ended up discussing every single topic. But I was so interested as our group kind of went around, like people were sharing, oh, I'm an ex. I belonged to this religion, or I belonged to that other religion, and then I left that religion. That story sort of permeated our group. So many people had that experience, or had experiences with divorce or other kinds of leaving. And so I was really interested in sort of weaving those stories together. I guess that's a round two sort of question, I guess. But in terms of people's stories, like that was just so interesting to me, as sort of everybody kind of had that in common, and that was sort of coming out just as we were getting to know each other. And so that was kind of one of the themes that sort of, even the whole weekend, people kind of were looking at their identities in that way of, I used to be this and now I'm this. But I might have just been sort of primed to think with those kind of questions, right? Because that's very close to what I study.
So was that your topic then? When it came around to you and they said, "What do you want to talk about, Clara?" What did you say?
Well, okay, so this is a test of my memory here. What did I say? I'm sure I said something safe, something something that would be a good enough answer to make it clear that I took it seriously, but something that wouldn't be personal. But I don't remember what that was. Probably because, you've been in a group like this, Karen. You got to say something that's safe. I don't know. That's the truthful answer. And I'm sure other people might.
Here, I'm pushing you, and then I'm trying to think myself, what was my topic? And I can't remember.
Because I think maybe that's the genius though of it coming around and around and around. Because for me, the first time, I'm always going to say something safe. I'm going to go with the estuarily topic and suggest better snacks or something like that, right?
Yeah. Or for me, sometimes the something safe is some big idea that I'm thinking about. Because if we're talking about some big idea, that's not going to get too close to what's, down in here, or some aspect of life that's hard to handle. Because we can talk about ideas. Ideas are always safe, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is what the speaker was thinking, and it's far away from my daily life.
Yeah.
So now that we're both sort of saying that, it's kind of strange then how we ended up talking about lots of really personal things. How did that happen?
It is interesting, isn't it? Yeah. I think that's the magic of Estuary, really. It's the magic of it. Partly because the first round is where you talk about who you are. So you introduce yourself, right? And then after you introduce yourself, at least this time around, in a normal estuary meeting, that first round would be maybe 15 minutes. But this time we had an hour, I think, for the first estuary meeting. So that getting to know each other was a little bit more extended, which allowed maybe a little bit more personal information to come out in the getting to know each other thing. So then by the time you come around to the topics in the second round, which I believe was 2 hours, we had 2 hours in the second session, which is a long time to be able to have a group conversation. There's a lot of space for interaction to take place. So during that second round, when people started bringing up topics, then we could say something like, oh, I can see why that topic would appeal to you because you're working on this project over here in your job, you know, or you live in this area, or we knew something about each other personally, so we could relate what they were thinking about to who they were as individuals. And so right away, you're starting to make all these connections and weaving everything together. And I think that brings everybody into a place where they feel very safe because they're starting to feel known. I was really struck, you know, I did that conversation with Kara and Lauren earlier, and I think it published yesterday. And both of them said, I've never been in a place where I have felt so seen.
Yes, I saw that. Yes.
And I thought, wow, that just captured in a one sentence what was really going on there. Because you didn't feel like a face on a screen. You didn't feel like some unknown entity who's just attending a conference and hoping to sit in the back or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You were seen as a person, as a human being, as someone, you know how Jordan Peterson always says, you should take care of yourself as though you're someone who's worth taking care of, just the way you would take care of a family member or even take care of your dog, you know, you should take care of yourself that same way. Because what that means is you're seeing yourself as somebody valuable. They were saying in this environment, other people were seeing me as somebody valuable enough to pay attention to and to want to come in contact with, maybe even come in contact with the messy parts of me and recognize that that's still valuable, right?
Yes, yes. And then as just like a next step from that stream, sort of, then I started to see myself. I thought I heard one of those people say, as somebody who could be seen.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, wow, that's the transformation right there.
Mm-hmm.
Still I have it. There are moments I conveniently forget that I'm a 40-year-old man. The last vestiges of a ghost long dead. A ghost with a messiah complex. A messiah too lazy to rise or ascend. Happily hurt and hard. A hanger-on or haunting of a time past. A heroic dream of the harrowing of hell. Failure to launch. Cling to a life vest. Treading in spells that linger and last. Mom and Dad, righteous and mad. Daydreamers with ghosts of their own. My memory of them stoic, looking with aims to pretend. Always on the brink of somewhere. Each a child dancing on the fence. On down the river. Dreamt in the sunshine. Saturday morning cartoons, the only Sabbath I knew. A disciple of Jim Henson and John Hughes. Worship in cathedrals where the Toys R Us, baptized in ball pits, a clown served the sacrament we eat, more Pepsi and Pizza Hut, say please, say cheese. Between Kurt Cobain, a scrambled cable screen, towers tumbling, Super Bowls and reality TV, the ghost is constitutionally unwilling and intrinsically unable to see and be seen, searching madly for attention to seek. But you could be anything. Never say never. If you've got nothing nice to say, don't say nothing, ever. Don't talk to strangers. See what I say. Just do it. You don't listen very well, do you? You don't do very well, do you? You're not looking too good, are you? Keep up. Appearances aren't what they seem. Will you ever grow up? You look like you're stuck. I think you took too much. echoes the ghost within the host who prays the dead bury their dead and stay buried.